Before the alarm clock, before the 8-hour workday, before the electric light burned away the night, we believed we understood sleep. We believe it now. 8 uninterrupted hours, a solid block of oblivion. Anything less, waking up at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, is a sign of failure, a symptom of anxiety, insomnia. But what if that 3 a.m. wake-up call isn't a failure? What if it's an echo? A distant memory of a time when humanity slept in a way that would baffle us today. A time when sleeping through the night was not only uncommon, it was seen as bizarre. Let's go back, not to the time of factories, but to the time of castles, to the medieval world. Here, the night was dark, not just city dark, but an oppressive, absolute blackness, broken only by the moon or the dim, expensive glow of a tallow candle. When the sun went down, the world ended. People retreated to their homes, not at 11 p.m., but often as early as 8 or 9 p.m., and they went to sleep. But this is where the story twists. They didn't sleep for 8 hours. They went to sleep for about 4. This was called first sleep, or primo somno. It was deep, it was restorative, and it was universal. Everyone from the farmer in his damp hovel to the lord in his drafty stone keep would fall into this first sleep. And then, somewhere around midnight, or perhaps 1 a.m., they woke up, deliberately. This wasn't a jarring interruption. It was the schedule. They would rise from their beds in the cold darkness and begin a period known as the watch. It lasted for an hour, sometimes 2. This wasn't insomnia. It was the most practical, spiritual, and productive part of the night. So, what did they do? This was a quiet, introspective time, a bubble of consciousness between 2 walls of sleep. For the devout, this was the perfect time for prayer. The world was silent. The distractions of the day were gone. Religious texts and prayer manuals from the period are filled with specific prayers intended only for this midnight watch. It was a time to connect with God, uninterrupted. For the scholars and the literate, a tiny fraction of the population, this was the time to read or write. The mind, rested from 4 hours of sleep, was considered uniquely sharp. They would light a single precious candle and pore over manuscripts, the only sound the scratching of a quill or the turning of a page. But for most people, the watch was about practicality. You would get up and tend the fire. In a medieval home, the fire was life. If it went out, the house would be plunged into a bone-chilling cold by morning. So you would add another log, stoke the embers, and ensure the heart of the home was still beating. You might check on your livestock. Animals were often brought inside or kept in an adjoining space to protect them from thieves or cold, and their body heat helped warm the home. A farmer might listen for a sick goat or a restless cow. You would use the bathroom, a chamber pot in the corner, emptied in the morning. And yes, this was also considered the best time for intimacy. Medieval physicians and marriage manuals noted that this period was ideal.
People were rested from their first sleep, not exhausted from a long day's labor. They were calm, and as one 16th century French doctor noted, they did it better and had more enjoyment during this midnight interlude. It was also a time for socializing. People would visit their neighbors, sharing a bit of warmth by the fire, or simply sitting and talking in the dark. It was a strange, quiet community. After an hour or two of this waking life, when the prayers were said and the logs were burning, they would simply go back to bed. They would fall into their second sleep, or secundus somnus, which lasted until sunrise. This two-part sleep cycle was the norm for centuries. It's mentioned casually in literature, from Chaucer to Tolstoy. It's a fascinating, almost alien concept of time. And if you find these glimpses into the past as compelling as I do, perhaps take a moment now, during this quiet interlude, to subscribe to the channel. We explore these forgotten histories together, one story at a time. Now, back to the darkness. It wasn't until the advent of artificial light, first with gas lamps in cities, and then the electric bulb, that our pattern began to change. We could suddenly and cheaply conquer the night. We could work later, socialize later. The night was no longer a barrier. It was a new frontier for activity. And then the Industrial Revolution finalized the shift. Factories needed workers to operate on long, rigid schedules. The 8-hour workday demanded an 8-hour sleep block to support it. Waking up in the middle of the night was no longer productive. It was inefficient. First and second sleep faded from our vocabulary, and the consolidated 8-hour block became the new mandatory normal. So the next time you find yourself wide awake at 3 a.m., your mind clear, don't panic. You aren't broken. You are just remembering.
But we should be clear. While this waking period sounds peaceful, the act of sleeping was for most people anything but comfortable. We obsess over thread counts, memory foam, and cooling gels. The medieval world obsessed over just not freezing. Let's talk about the bed. For the vast majority of the population, the peasants, a bed was not a piece of furniture. It was a pile. The typical peasant bed was a pallet. This was quite literally a sack made of rough fabric, stuffed with whatever was available. If you were lucky, it was straw. If not, it was hay or dried leaves or bracken. This pallet was laid directly on the cold, damp, earthen floor. Think about that. Straw. It's not soft. It compresses. It's itchy. And it is a magnificent home for everything else. Your medieval straw pallet was a thriving ecosystem. It was home to fleas, lice, mites, and, if you were truly unlucky, bed bugs. Mice and rats would tunnel through it for warmth and discarded crumbs of food. You didn't just sleep on your bed, you slept with it. Scratching was as much a part of sleeping as dreaming. If a family had a bit more money, they might have a simple wooden frame. This wasn't for comfort. It was to lift the pallet off the freezing, wet floor and hopefully slightly above the rats. And linens? Sheets? A rare luxury. Most people slept in the same clothes they wore all day, a simple linen or wool tunic. They were often smoky from the fire, damp with sweat, and hadn't been properly washed in weeks. You just got in. But the biggest difference? You were never
ever alone. Privacy is a modern invention. In the medieval world, the bed was a communal space. Entire families slept together in one heap. Father, mother, children, and maybe a grandparent, all piled under the same straw pallet. This wasn't just for emotional comfort. It was a survival strategy. It was called huddling. In a drafty house with no insulation, the only reliable source of heat was other people. You shared body heat to keep from freezing. You would also often bring the animals inside. The family dog, the chickens, or even a prize pig might sleep in the same one-room hut, adding their warmth to the small space. For the wealthy, things were better, but perhaps stranger. The noble's bed was a massive four-poster wooden structure. It was the most expensive piece of furniture in the house, often more valuable than the house itself. It was so valuable, it was passed down in wills. This bed had a canopy, not for decoration, but for necessity. The canopy was a roof, designed to catch, or at least slow down, anything falling from the ceiling. Dirt, spiders, rainwater from a leaky roof, or rodent droppings. Heavy velvet curtains surrounded the bed. Again, not for style. They were pulled shut to create a tiny room within a room, trapping the sleeper's body heat and, most importantly, keeping out the bone-chilling drafts that whistled through the stone walls of a castle. Their mattress was a significant upgrade, a thick sack filled with feathers, but it too had to be maintained, and it too still harbored pests. Wealthy women often had small furry lapdogs that were bred not just as companions, but to sleep in the bed and attract the fleas off the human.
So, you are in your bed. It's cold. You are itchy. You are huddled with your entire family. Now, you must prepare to sleep. But in the medieval mind, sleep was not just a physical act. It was a spiritual gamble. To go to sleep was to render yourself unconscious, to become vulnerable. And the night belonged to the devil. They believed the darkness was filled with demons, evil spirits, and specters. To sleep was to risk your soul. You might be tempted in a dream. A demon, an incubus or succubus, might visit you. Or you simply might not wake up. In a time of rampant disease, poor nutrition, and no medicine, dying in your sleep was a common and terrifying possibility. Therefore, you could not simply go to bed. You had to prepare. This is why bedtime prayers were not the gentle, "now I lay me down to sleep" rhymes we think of. They were a desperate, essential ritual, a last-minute spiritual defense. People would confess their sins from the day, begging for absolution, just in case they didn't make it to morning. They were, in effect, performing their own last rites every single night. And what about that outfit? The image of someone in a long nightshirt and a pointed, floppy hat, the nightcap, is a cliché, but it was absolutely real and absolutely necessary. The nightshirt was long, often down to the ankles, made of wool or linen. It was your only real layer of insulation against the cold that seeped in. The nightcap was even more crucial. Medieval homes, from hovels to castles, were incredibly drafty. There was no central heating. The only heat came from a fire that was likely dying down by the time you went to bed.
Most of your body heat escapes through your head. The nightcap was the only thing keeping your skull warm. It also served a secondary purpose. It helped keep the lice from migrating too easily. So you would lie down, fully clothed, wearing a hat, surrounded by family, itching from the straw, mumbling a prayer, in fear. You would drift off into your first sleep, and then, around 1 a.m., you would wake up, as intended. You would rise, stoke the fire, say your midnight prayers, and perhaps look out the window at a world plunged into a darkness so total we can no longer even imagine it. And then you would go back to your straw pile for your second sleep. This was the rhythm of the night for thousands of years, a two-part sleep, punctuated by a period of quiet, dark consciousness. It is only us in the last 200 years who have enforced the idea of the 8-hour unbroken block. We have forgotten the watch. We have forgotten the dual rhythm of our ancestors. And we have, in our brightly lit, climate-controlled memory foam world, convinced ourselves that waking up at 3 a.m. is the problem. Perhaps it is the solution. Perhaps it is just memory. Does this change how you think about your own sleep? Let me know in the comments what part of the medieval night you found the most bizarre. I read them all. Sleep well.